Yeah, you feel ready to chat?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
What I always tell people is.
Did you get that on camera?
Hi. I toured what is arguably one of the most critical pieces of infrastructure in the United States. And now, I'm taking you with me. Earlier, I made a video that's an overview of the Soo Locks in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. These structures let ships pass between Lake Superior and Lake Huron, and they're so important for industry, carrying so much iron that's used in making steel, that if the largest lock broke unexpectedly, the Department of Homeland Security has estimated that the US GDP would drop by over $1 trillion. And the Army Corps of Engineers let me inside, behind the government security fence, and let me film in all kinds of places that the public isn't normally allowed. The tour was fascinating, and I left in awe of just how much it takes to keep this place going. So, let's go on a tour.
There's no such thing as a normal day. So the locks operate 24 hours a day. Sometimes we'll have like almost all the ships come through overnight, and then there's nothing during the day. And then sometimes it's the other way around. And this boat will be back in about 3 days. It takes 28 hours to get to Duluth or two harbors.
Okay.
Then figure about 10 to 12 hours to load, and then 28 to come back.
Wow, all right. This is Michelle. She's the chief park ranger and has an enormous amount of knowledge about this place. She's one of the main people we talk to, along with 3 others. Carmen, an engineer technician with a passion for history. Rachel, who's a supervisory civil engineer working with the contractors building a new lock here at the Soo. And Rob, who was acting as the chief lockmaster, running the show on the day we visited. But now that you know the cast, I should give you a recap of what all happens here. You can find more information in the last video, but here's the summary. The Soo Locks exist to help watercraft navigate a roughly 20-foot drop over a short stretch of the St. Mary's River. The Canadian side of the border has 1 lock, and right now the American side has 2. The smaller is the MacArthur, and the bigger is the Poe. There used to be 2 more locks called the Davis and the Sabin, but those are being replaced with a new lock that will be the same size as the Poe. That new lock is due to be finished in 2030, and Congress is actually giving it a name. So until then, they've just been calling it the new lock. And we'll head over to the construction site in a minute. As for how the locks work, it's actually pretty straightforward. When a ship is headed down, it stops in the lock and water drains out of holes in the floor until the ship is at the same level as Lake Huron. When a ship is going up, the opposite happens. Water comes in through those holes from Lake Superior. And there are no pumps moving the water in and out. All of this is powered by gravity. But like with many engineering projects, there's still a whole lot you have to consider here, and a lot I didn't realize as just a casual visitor. For instance, how do you decide at which speed the locks should drain and fill? And mechanically, how do you control that?
So what, I guess if you know, what drives the speed at which you're willing to empty the locks? I guess that was probably you're designed to a particular speed. Is that for safety? Is it, what would happen to the water?
If the water is flowing too fast, that's going to affect the stabilization of the ship in the lock. So we can't have the lock, the flow of the water go too fast, or else the ship is going to bounce. Even though the ship is secured to the lock wall, it's done for that purpose. Okay. Just for stability and safety purpose.
I believe it's primarily you don't want to damage the concrete. You don't want water that's overly turbulent, and not just the concrete, but just the structure in general. You want to keep it controlled. And then I believe, as Carmen mentioned, you don't want to potentially damage the vessel. Right. Water tends to misbehave if it moves too quickly. Yeah. So there's actually a special concrete mix that is placed around the concrete, around the culverts. So they call it high velocity concrete that's placed specifically in those culverts. Mm-hmm. And it's to help with the, basically when you have really turbulent water, it'll hit the concrete and it'll damage it. So it has to be extra, like super smooth in those areas where you have the water moving through it really quickly.
Okay, and so is that for the controlling the speed, or is that to keep the lock intact with all of the moving water.
So you'd want to control the speed in order to help prevent damage to the concrete, basically.
Okay, I see.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and you will see some eroded concrete out here at some big facility. But one of the cool things about concrete is it gets harder over time. So it's one of those things where, the freeze thaw is a challenge here, especially with the winter times. And then also, I don't know, there's some unique challenges associated with especially the groundwater. So a big part of the work that we had to do for creating the dam wasn't even in the river. It's outside the river. It's controlling groundwater seepage, right? Because we're below below the water table. Sorry, random thought.
No,
groundwater.
No need to apologize.
Yes.
That's great. Part of this didn't surprise me. Like, okay, sure, how fast your bathtub empties is also affected by the size of the drain. But the part where they had to consider what concrete to put around those holes, that level of detail I thought was cool. And of course, that's not the only thing they thought about. Like, if you visit the Soo, you might notice that the gates sealing off the locks aren't going straight across the gap. They're angled, and they all point upstream to Lake Superior. There's a reason for that my husband behind the second camera figured out much more quickly than I did.
So I noticed that the gates are angled such that they're steepled upstream.
Yes, that's to keep the pressure on the gate.
So that the force of the water presses them close.
That's right. Yep. See, you got this. Perfect. You're natural.
Here's what they're connecting about. When there's more water on the upstream side of the gate, that water puts pressure on the gate. If you make the gate straight or have it pointed downstream like this, that force could push the gates open. But if you angle it upstream, then when that force pushes on the gates, it's actually pushing the two sides together. The sides of the gate are actually too long to swing through to the other side. So the odds of a catastrophic failure go down dramatically. Overall though, there's some opening context for you about the locks. Now, let's go explore.
This one's coming in hot.
Some of them are like Captain Cautious, and some of them are...
This is moving pretty good.
If you come here, you can see the gap.
Yeah, if you look like
look.
right there.
Oh. That's such a small gap. Oh my gosh.
Well, and it's like a very precise angle, which I'm always impressed by because they have the bow thrusters, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the secret.
Yep, bow thruster.
I'm still impressed.
And they
I could
ride
never...
the wall on the other side.
Yeah.
So it'll just barely be on it.
Wow.
They like to come in with the captains called 0 and 5. So they like to come in right in hard on the north wall and have the gap here because the bows are very boxy shaped because they can carry more cargo that way instead of a V-shaped hull. So that bow is pushing water ahead of it. That water hits those gates and it comes back. So the way the captain explained it to me is they like to have that gap for that water to move around them.
Okay.
Oh, so it has somewhere to go.
Neat.
Look at that.
That makes sense.
I'm
And
learning
I'm not
things.
even an
I
engineer.
learn something every tour that I participate in, Michelle.
This is a good spot for a photo, by the way.
Oh boy. So it is.
Ooh, that's a nice breeze.
That is nice.
I know all the spots, almost all of them.
So, looks like there are spots inside the lock and in the wall where you could tie off. Are those ever used?
Not often. I think that they were, and I'm speculating here, but I think they were meant for tie-offs for like a workboat.
Okay.
Because it's not a place you could tie up a ship that's locking through.
Right.
Because to lock through, they have to be on the buttons because they have to keep adjusting the lines as they go up and down. But if you had a workboat in here to replace concrete or do something else like that, you could secure it theoretically.
Okay.
Well, in general, you don't want to break up the surface any more than you have to, because every time you have a corner, it's a maintenance liability, and it also means that you have to interrupt the wall armor. So those are steel members running up and down, and it's so that the boat rubs against the steel as opposed to rubbing against the concrete.
Yeah, because if you'll note, there's the steel bars on the north side. There are none on the south. It's just a reinforcement because this is where the gap is.
Okay, so that's why you were saying they can run along that wall?
Yeah, they run along the
Okay.
north wall and it's reinforced. If you look, they're about to put the lines on the buttons. Those cables weigh about 175 pounds.
You'll also see in some places the timber fenders. So there's actually some right below us. But just around the facility, there's some over there as well. They're sacrificial. They're replaced every few years.
Okay.
So you want to choose where the boat hits things, because the boat's going to hit things. And
Now let Rachel lead the way for where we're going.
yeah, I guess we'll walk this way and kind of look from a little bit of a distance. But this is the New Lock construction site.
All right.
Directly on our left.
Cool.
So the near lock is the Davis, and then beyond that is the Sabin lock. Oh, and that's the Magic School Bus. It's not actually, I mean,
It's a magic school
it
bus
is
for
a Magic
grown-ups.
School Bus. Well, so I think the site is about, don't quote me on this. I'm terrible at judging distances.
No,
but
you're
it's
good.
Like 2.5 miles from end to end. And so the construction workers, they come by barge. Actually, they don't come by barge, they come by tour
Soo Locks
boat.
tour boat.
So they basically, I think they rent it or they
have a
hire
contract
it.
with
them.
them.
Yeah. So they use a tour boat to move their workforce to the site, and then they've got the Jolly Green bus to drop them off around the site, because it's an extremely large site. You'll see the little yellow carts. They drive me crazy. I think they look silly, but also it saves so much time. Like, I'm one of those people, I would much rather walk, but also I don't want to waste time. Comically
See how they get back on?
construction equipment.
Oh, thank you. I wondered about that.
And there's the guy with the
Oh.
mail.
Yeah, mail guy. Cool. Thank you for pointing that out, because we saw yesterday a couple of guys like swinging down onto
On the
side.
bosun's chairs.
Yeah, and we were like, well, how do they get back up?
All right, we are entering the New Lock construction site, and
All right.
actually we're going to pull over here, so we're out of the way. It's an exciting summer, and actually you're coming to visit at a very exciting time for the project. So we awarded the New Lock contract a couple summers ago, summer of 2022. The contractor's really going into their second full season. As I'm sure you can guess, it's a very seasonal activity around here doing construction, although they did work through the winter. So really, one of the challenges that we have to work through is the fact that the new lock is being built on the footprint of 2 existing locks, which means that we need to do something with those 2 existing locks first. And then on top of that, we're also building in the middle of a river. The site is literally an island. So really, I shouldn't say step 1, because there's been a whole lot of steps to get to this point, but one of the major beginning milestones is getting a cofferdam in place in the river in order to isolate the project site.
Okay.
And we call it dewatering, which is removing all the water. So there's very large pumps. We draw the water down. There's a couple things going on here. You can see the water.
Yeah.
That's actually, so the dewatering pumps are over there on the barge. I think they're only running one. They've got a very robust system, and it's more than they need. So I believe they're only running one pump. And they're pumping the water through their system and out into the upstream end. And one of the things we have to make sure the contractor does is maintain tolerable levels of turbidity, which is sediments in the water. We don't want them introducing sediments out into the St. Mary's River. There's fish habitats. It's a treaty fishing location. There's recreational traffic, all sorts of reasons. So the discharge is on the upstream end, and it's actually behind a turbidity curtain, and that's to allow things to settle out. So that's the way that the water is routed. Now, there's 2 locks being dewatered at the same time, and what our contractor found is that we don't know what's going on with the valves that connect the 2, so the 2 locks don't necessarily communicate hydraulically, right? So if we pump water out of this one, it doesn't necessarily pump water out of the other one. So they're actually pumping water from the northern lock into the southern lock and then out of the southern lock. So you'll see a couple different places where there's water coming in, but then the water is going out, and that's all it's managed so that it's less than 2 feet per day. You can actually see the bathtub rings
Yeah.
where we've got the initial dewatering going on. So actually they started on Wednesday. I think they were a little bit below the black line, but you can even see the wet marks where that's been over the last couple days. And then over on the eastern end, you can see that that's the cofferdam that the contractor built. And you can definitely see on that where the water line was.
Oh, yeah. Cool.
So the controls for the pumps are over there. You see the kind of white boxes? Yep. That's where the switches are. The pumps are complicated. They're not my forte, but they perform differently depending on how much pressure they're dealing with and how much they're pumping. So it's something that has to be adjusted as the water level comes down. And actually, that gentleman who was walking over near us, he's the project engineer who's in charge of the dewatering system.
All right.
So he's the guy running the show. As we draw the water down, you're removing that hydrostatic pressure from the face of the lock concrete. It's also very old. So the two existing locks, the Davis lock and the Sabin lock, over 100 years old. There's a lot of unknowns when you're dealing with old structures. So because of that, we have what we call monolith stability measures that are there in order to reinforce those monoliths and make sure that they don't try to move when we start removing the water. So when we go out on site, you'll be able to see there's actually lock struts spanning the locks in order to help push against the lock walls just in case. It's very much a precautionary measure, as I'm sure you would guess. Between the 19-teens when those locks were built and 2024, design standards change.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Things like factors of safety change, and that's one of the big reasons for that. So we've got lock struts, there's rock anchors in place. Do you see it's almost like a nub sticking out of the ground over there? It's gray, like a gray cylinder poking out of the ground. Yes. There's a couple of them in a row. Yep. Those are the rock anchors. So those rock anchors are drilled down into the bedrock, and then they're tensioned, so they basically like bite into the bedrock to help hold that monolith in place. So that's the nice like finished top of it, but it's basically a bunch of strands hooked into the bedrock and then tension. Actually on that one over to the right, you see like there's a tube coming off of it. So we have pretty extensive monitoring equipment on site to make sure that things aren't moving. And it's called a load cell, which basically measures how much force that anchor is holding in place. Cool. So if there's a spike in the load, it's indicative that there's something going on. Understood.
Okay, goofy
My
question.
name is on the sign.
What am I looking at here?
It's a very good question. So these are survey prisms, and you can see they're kind of all lined up. They're all looking somewhere. So actually, I don't remember where there it is. That's the total station. So the total station reads the location of each of these points at different intervals.
Make sure they don't move.
And they make sure they don't move.
Nice.
And these are all over the site, and I can tell you what, they're very easy to like kick. And then I get an email being like, the monolith's falling over. Not really, but that's,
And this monolith for this lock has enough concrete in it to pave from here to the Mackinac Bridge.
Whoa.
And if you consider now the Sabin has to be removed, they have to pull out that much concrete from underground.
Where do you put it? Like, where are they taking it?
What a great question. So a lot of the material is actually being disposed of on site. So the Davis is being filled in eventually. Okay. So the concrete has to be crushed down to a particular size. They have to remove like the rebar and dispose of it. Any of the, like there are hazardous materials on site. Those have to be abated and removed. But eventually the material gets crushed down and basically deposited in a couple different places on site.
Including inside that lock.
Yep.
All right.
These are also, I guess, fun fact, these are saw cuts. It's another way that you make sure that something isn't moving is you cut through the joint and then make
sure
sure
that
it's
cut
not
doesn't
moving.
get bigger.
Yeah.
That's so simple.
'Cause it would displace it. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's
They make
great.
sure they line up
Well, and
across
it's
the joint.
that one, I love saw cut. This is me being like old school and analog. I love saw cuts because anyone can check it, and
need a
it's not
ruler.
gonna lie. That's the thing. Like we get some, someone kicks the survey prism and we get a bad reading, but that's the sort of thing where it's like you can tell if something is slowly happening.
Is there anything you've had to think about in the work on the new lock that has kind of surprised you, or a particularly interesting constraint? Anything that's annoying you?
Ooh. One of the biggest constraints that we deal with is the fact that it's a operating facility. So that's, I guess, less of an engineering problem, more of a logistics and communication problem.
Sure.
because they have to maintain traffic through the locks. So we cannot stop operations of marine traffic. So our contractor basically has to work around it. And as I said, it's an island. They access the site primarily by water. So that means that everything has to get to site by barge. They actually, they have a concrete batch plant on site, which is a huge advantage. To be honest with you, I cannot even imagine trying to do this project without having an on-site batch plant, because concrete does not wait around and there's going to be a ton of it for this project. So that's a major constraint. And then also there's hydropower generated here on site, and part of our work is actually helping to improve some of that hydropower infrastructure. And that's also another critical one where we have to make sure that we're timing things correctly. We can't take it offline for a whole bunch of time, because that's a source of power for a pretty significant portion of the area.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm gonna have, just come on over, kind of tuck in over here, just so we're out of the way. But this is some of the stability excavation, we call it. So basically removing some of the material from the backside of the monoliths to help reduce the loading. So we put struts basically wherever we could, but sometimes the geometry doesn't allow for it. And then in the case of the Sabin, we've got to be able to demolish it, so we can't have struts in the way. Right. So we had to use some different measures. So actually the backside of those monoliths is all excavated behind it, and then over here. And then our contractor used mechanical methods. So basically it's actually right here.
Wow, how perfect.
So that's the hoe ram attachment that gets attached to an excavator. It's a hydraulic jackhammer, basically, but very large, very loud. We're super popular with the locals. It's also the time of year when, like, I open my windows at night now, which means I live like a mile, maybe a mile and a quarter from here, and I can hear it at night. So we're everybody's favorite project. But yeah, that's they started a little bit of demolition on the monoliths, which is what you're seeing here. You can actually see where they cut out. So there's lead used as a water stop in some of the older monoliths, and they had to remove that. Really important that we had to keep it out of the water. So that's something they basically had a whole process to be able to identify it. Luckily, it's very solid, so it was relatively easy to remove. But that's why you see kind of at like strategic intervals it being cut out, and that's where they had. That's hello, right?
It's just
How
a
boats say
salute.
hello?
Yeah.
That's cute.
The little honk.
Oh.
What is it? One long honk and then two short honks or something
There's
like that?
all kinds of salutes.
Yeah, okay.
Because, these were built in 1919 and 1914, and so lead and asbestos were wonder materials.
Oh yeah.
It's a pretty extensive part of the early construction. Well, and then got a couple drill rigs over there on the left. And they're performing, we call it foundation verification drilling. Okay. It's basically to determine the actual top of bedrock. Okay. So there's a lot of design assumptions that our design team made in terms of how the bedrock was configured and how that would interface with the new design. One of the things that our contractor has to do is basically go around and do a bunch of drilling and find where the bedrock actually is. So in theory, it's confirmatory, but in some cases, like on the bridge, we had a couple piers where we actually changed the height of the pier in order to go down to the bedrock. Okay. Yep. That's about it. There's a lot going on. It was blizzarding in the Porcupine Mountains. I was like, I'm not dying today. This is not, I'll come back. We're going back.
I'm going to take them this way into the Davis basement and stuff, and I'm just going to do operation stuff if you want to peel off.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to
Do
take
you
your
have any
microphone.
last minute?
Yes.
Or else
Do you have
she'll
any
get
last
home.
things you need from her, or
No, this has been wonderful.
before we release her?
Thank you
Release
for
me into the wild.
Yeah, thanks for hanging out this afternoon. Now, I'll be honest. By this point, I thought I knew all of the big things there were to know about the Soo Locks. Like, sure, there were details and processes that I didn't understand, but that was all in the weeds stuff, right? Deeper than I tend to go for any one topic. Well, and maybe you saw this coming, I was completely wrong. Because as it turns out, there is a whole section of the Soo Locks you can't even see from the surface. Because it's underground. After Rachel left, Michelle took us into the Davis building, which is between the Poe Lock and the New Lock construction site, because she wanted to show us something. See, in mid-January, the Soo Locks closed down for a couple of months for maintenance. I had learned a little about this from Carmen.
Every year, when the locks are closed, our various crews, electricians, mechanical persons, we inspect the locks to make sure that everything is in order. Machinery, everything, the gates, concrete work. And that it also entails a lot of behind the scenes work, because it's not only the maintenance people, but it's the purchasing people that are directly involved too. The engineers plan for the various machinery that's got to be ordered and the various materials. And it takes the combination of engineering and our office staff to coordinate these efforts to purchase the materials and rent the equipment well in advance of the winter works. In fact, our planning for next year's winter work is being planned right now.
Oh my gosh, and it's May.
Yes, yes.
Cool.
Well, there's always a lot of lead times, to get the various materials and to order equipment. And that takes time, and it's got to go through Detroit, contracting office in Detroit.
Okay.
So it's got to be well coordinated, well in advance before we can actually start the work.
And for maintenance, do you have to drain the locks?
And sometimes we do. If the lock requires dewatering, like last year, the Poe Lock and the MacArthur Lock were both dewatered. It's dependent if the repairs require dewatering, and sometimes they don't.
And I guess when you do have to dewater the locks, is there like a pumping system built in? Do you bring pumps in?
Yes, there's a pumping system in the Davis building, which you're going to see in a little bit, that actually dewaters the locks. But when the locks are in operation, it's just a natural flow of gravity up and down. But yes, we do have a pumping system in this building and in the Davis building that the water flows into these pumps and it drains out in the pipes in the piers that actually dewaters the locks.
So Michelle took us into the Davis building and was going to show us the pump room. Unfortunately, filming is not allowed down there, but there are some publicly available photos and you can use your imagination for the rest.
And I was working in the glass plate negative collection, and I'm going through all these photos, and I came across this one, and it looked so familiar. I could not place it. It's like, where is that? And I'm like trying to figure it out. And then I got further in the series, and I realized, they built the building around them.
Yeah, smart.
So I'll take you down to see those. There's no photography allowed once we go down the steps.
Not a problem. All right, camera is off.
Okay, thank you. So I think Carmen explained the only time we use pumps is in the winter to take that last 30 feet of water out of the lock. To lower a boat or raise it 21 feet, that takes us 20 minutes, give or take. To take that last 30 feet out takes us between 16 and 20 hours.
Wow.
So that's why you don't use pumps to lock boats.
Yeah.
It wouldn't make any sense.
Huh.
And it'll move much faster by gravity.
Interesting. I always thought it was just like simplicity.
Well, I mean that too, but also the speed.
Wow.
And so it takes us that 16 to 20 hours using these 3 pumps and 2 more in the administration building. Okay. So there's 2 350 horsepower pumps over there, these 3 300 horsepower pumps. There's a smaller maintenance pump, and they have 5-foot discharges, and it still takes up to 20 hours. Wow. So we can try to go up through the galleries if you want to, or we can go up on the surface. The galleries is a place nobody ever gets to see.
Well,
You can't film it,
that's just fine.
but okay.
Yeah, that'd be really cool.
That was all the sales pitch I needed. Did you catch that? We're about to go from the pump rooms into the galleries, underground tunnels that run the length of the locks. Again, no photography allowed, but I will at least say it was kind of spooky down there.
And we call these the galleries. When I first started here, my background's museums. And they're like, the galleries? What are you talking about? I was like, I'm thinking pictures.
Right.
And we call it the galleries, and it runs the entire length on both sides. And we get under a light. So we're in this one on the north side.
Okay.
So right under us is the culvert.
Cool.
But this is what we call a crossover.
Oh.
It goes down about 10 stories, and then it goes underneath the miter gate and then up again.
Cool.
But it's like 10 stories up and 10 down, 10 up.
Okay.
Wow.
And so all these machinery rooms are for the valves and for like the ship arresters and machines I don't even understand.
Sure.
If the lock is at high pool, we're underwater. We're below water level. Because if you think about it, when we looked out that door, we were at the St. Mary's River level. You know, people come to the Soo Locks and they think they've seen it,
Right, yeah.
but it's actually all underground.
We came out of the galleries in one of the lock operation booths, where, once again, no filming was allowed. But you can easily pick out these structures from the surface. And we had one more stop to make where I was allowed to film. We walked back down the Poe lock to go visit the chief lockmaster.
And here you can get kind of a good view of one of those ship arresters. Although you might get a better shot with the light behind you at the lower end.
Oh yeah, I agree.
So what are the ship arresters?
They are basically like an emergency brake system. If a ship were to come in and be unable to stop in time, they would hit that arrestor. The boom, the big part you really notice, just holds a cable. The cable's about 4.5 inches in diameter, and it locks into a braking system in these little structures behind the boom.
Okay.
Oh,
And
I
it works
see.
kind of the way on an aircraft carrier,
Sure.
when a jet's landing and the cable grabs it. It does the same thing, but in a little slower motion.
Cool.
And they work.
Wow.
We've had ships touch them,
Wow, okay.
and they work.
All right. Related to barriers in the locks, are there still torpedo nets?
No,
Okay.
there are not.
I didn't think so, but I was curious.
But the MacArthur lock was designed with them.
Yeah.
And then another neat feature the MacArthur lock had is it has these operating shelters you can see on the surface.
Mm-hmm.
It had operating shelters in the galleries.
Oh, wow.
So there were underground operating shelters. So if there were an airstrike that took out the operating shelter or did any damage, they could repair it, and they had an alternate operating station underground.
Cool. Wow.
So we were walking basically just under the sidewalk. Because here's our steam plant, and right there's our compressor building.
Yeah. Cool. It seemed so much farther apart when you were in a dark tunnel underground.
Yes. And even building, these are fairly new structures. They've been built since I started here.
Okay.
And the whole thing is a whole process with the National Park Service and the State Historic Preservation Office. Because we're actually a National Register historic landmark.
Okay, that makes sense.
So it's not just on the register, we're a landmark. We're one of less than 3,000 in the entire country.
Wow. Okay.
So even to change our light poles is something
Oh.
that we have to negotiate.
Fascinating.
And luckily for us, the SHPO and National Park Service is also very understanding that this is a dynamic, active site.
Cool.
And it can't be frozen at 1947.
Right, yeah. Okay, I'm glad
Yeah,
you know
it's interesting to be a historic landmark and also an active facility.
Yes, it is. And it can be a challenge sometimes. And then these gates operate with hydraulic cylinders, which you can see there.
that. Yeah, do you mind if I take a couple of shots from you?
Nope.
Okay, thank you.
And each leaf of those gates weigh 250 tons.
It was only the finest in tennis ball technology.
That's so when they swing this gate, this is an anchor system that locks it into place.
Okay.
So the tennis ball, and they replace those and repaint them from time to time.
Yeah.
It's so when he's in the shelter, he can see that that tennis ball dropped, which means that the gate is pinned in place, because a boat can't move unless that gate is pinned in place, because they could displace the gate and have a serious problem.
Huh, cool.
So it looks silly, but it serves a very practical purpose.
Yeah, that's neat.
I'll show you their post office.
Oh, cool.
So this is where the sailors come and pick up their mail.
Oh, it's smaller than I thought.
Yeah. And so they'll drop off any outgoing mail they have in that little box. Someone from the post office comes every day, and then it's all boat names.
Wow.
Some of them don't sail anymore.
Huh.
And the last thing I figured I'd do is I'll take you up in the tower.
I won't say no to that. Thank you.
to shut behind us. For a government office building, the detail is just crazy.
That's lovely. This is beautiful.
Isn't it? And it was always a government office building.
Wow. So this was 1897?
Yep.
Wow.
And I love showing people this.
What? What on earth? It's so weird. I love it.
So we can ditch our stuff and we'll go up. I'll give Rob a warning call. So this is where the chief lockmaster works.
Okay. Hello. Doing well. How are you doing?
Good.
Yeah?
And this, it's a little bright and hazy, but this is the best view in the Soo.
Wow.
Where you can see.
Thank you. Wow, that's beautiful. The chief lockmaster tells ships which lock they should go through and in what order. Because on any given day, there's a combination of cargo ships, personal watercraft, government vessels, and much more, all trying to go through here. On the day we visited, Rob was the chief lockmaster, and he was so generous to spend some time chatting with us, especially because we caught him on a very busy day at the end of a 12-hour shift. Like a couple of hours before we got there, the First Lady had actually toured the Soo Locks. Like Dr. Jill Biden, the First Lady, along with the second gentleman, Mr. Emhoff. So as you can imagine, there was a lot going on.
Yeah, so there's a lot going on. There's a snow removal cruise. It's pretty much 24/7. There's guys working. Excuse me, sorry.
No.
Hiawatha WE21.
And we're getting ready to leave gate 26 here, and can we have a lockdown along with the byway too?
Roger, we'll take you in the by the way down and turn back from the Ostrander.
Roger that. Thank you. Hiawatha.
I don't think he's too happy.
So can you just tell me what just happened?
Oh, okay. Sorry, yeah.
No, don't apologize.
So as they come up the river, they will call us on this radio at each check-in point. We'll write down their times. Yeah, the Corps loves stats. They keep track of everything. I'm pretty sure they know how many times every gate swung, every lockage, which helps with maintenance also. But yeah, we'll keep track of times, check-in times as they go up, the lock-through times, any delays. Just one more second, please. CSL Niagara, WE21.
Yeah, they're up into admission.
Roger will be up the pole and a turn back from the St. Laurent. As soon as you get room, you can put it on the end of the pier until you get the green light.
Okay, that's over the pier.
Normally you spend all day practicing your radio voice, but mine is gone. So I don't even know if they understand me at times. But
So yeah, there's, all the times that each lockage entails. And they'll call in at each checkpoint and we'll write those times down. And then we have one radio for the PO lock, another one for the MAC lock. And we'll dispatch the boat to the guys.
so the operators and the lockmaster all have to really pay attention. It's kind of a team thing with every lockage.
But yeah, that's kind of the extent of that.
The rules are government vessel first, so a Corps vessel, a Coast Guard vessel, Border Patrol, then cargo carriers like the one behind you, then commercial ships like the Soo Locks boat tours and various tugboats, then your personal watercraft. So there's a hierarchy. So even though Rob feels bad, we've got to move that cargo vessel before we can, right.
And ultimately, I mean, the lockmaster, everything's up to a lockmaster's discretion.
Sure.
So it does, but you try to keep everything the same every time.
Yeah, it's like toddlers, you just have to be consistent.
Yeah.
And this is the rule.
Yeah.
It makes your job easier and theirs. I mean, if everybody knows what's expected of them.
The MacArthur lock and the Poe lock are getting up there in age a bit. So I'm curious, like what does the future hold for them?
When the new lock is put in commission, the pole lock will be receiving a lot of upgrades to it. And the MacArthur lock, we expect that to be in service for many, many more years.
Wow, that's great.
It's opened in 1943 and it's still going strong.
Great. Oh, I love to hear that.
The concrete on that lock is just rock solid. So it's remarkably good shape. That it's a marvelously fantastic engineering marvel.
It takes a whole team here. So we have engineers, we have people who do the administration tasks, we have craftsmen who can do this historic plaster work and can do all this historic restoration work. We have machinists, we have welders, we have electricians, we have park rangers. It takes a whole team to keep this facility running. Because with Corps of Engineers, everybody just thinks engineers.
Right, yeah.
There's so many more. There are careers here for everybody. Whenever we do these tours with the kids, I always kind of point out, you don't have to be a math and science whiz. There's all kinds of jobs here.
And really, this is a big thing that struck me while I was talking to all of these people. From Carmen talking about the purchasing staff, to Rachel and the other engineers, to Rob and the lock operators, to that last comment from Michelle. Everyone was clear that keeping the Soo Locks running at its best is a group effort that requires a wide range of skills. In many ways, the goal is simple: get ships safely up and down the St. Mary's River. The solution even seems straightforward: build some locks, which humans have been doing for centuries. But the execution, that takes hundreds of people and years of design, planning, maintenance, and construction. I love stories where people with a diversity of skill sets come together to make something interesting and helpful that none of them could do on their own. But what I didn't expect was to find that exact scenario playing out in Sault Ste. Marie. This video is brought to you by the good folks who support this series on Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. These people have chipped in to make more videos like this happen. And even more so than YouTube advertising dollars or the occasional sponsor, they are the most consistent, reliable source of funding for these videos. Like you can probably guess, it takes a lot of time and effort to make this happen. So as always, thank you. If you'd like to learn more about supporting these videos, you can head over to alexisdahl.com/support. And if that's not for you, no worries. It's not an expectation, and I'm really just so glad you're here. And on that note, thanks as always for being here. I hope you learned something that makes you think about the world just a little differently, and I'll see you soon.